Hello, the digital journey community, and welcome to another podcast episode, ringing in the new year with another new episode, bringing you real experiences from real operators to help you identify the ways you can improve your business. As always, I've got my co-host and right-hand man, Brandon Schaefer, with me today. Brandon, how's everything going?
It's going good, man. I'm trying to find my hand here. I know it's everything's opposite on here. So
Yeah.
Hello. How are you? Good to be here, man. I know we have a good guest today. I'm excited to hear what he has to share.
Likewise, I think for the very first time, our guest is, from outside of the United States. So interested to bring the community another strong topic. Today, we'll be focusing more on how you can empower your leaders to drive change from within your organization. And of course, what is the role that technology can play in that? So without further ado, I'd like to bring on our guest for today, Gerald O'Connor. Gerald, it's great to have you. Thank you for taking the time to come on.
Great to be here.
Awesome. Perfect. And Gerald, as I know, right, you're joining us from across the pond, as some of us likes to say, but it'd be great if you don't mind to go into a little bit of your background, let the community know where you're from. And of course, what is GOCP and kind of how your journey started.
Okay, well, as you might guess, it was a pretty long journey, but I'm from Sligo, Ireland, the northwest of Ireland, looking over the Atlantic at you, the Yeats County, the county that W.B. Yeats, the poet, wrote much of his, inspired much of his poetry. But anyway, my journey began, I suppose, my studies after school were basically around agriculture, the theoretical and the practical management. And I went from there to purchase a business that formerly was in the family, but it was attached to some property. So I went into the retail public house business and agricultural merchants, wholesale and retail, and a bit of catering, and went along there for about 30 years at that. And allied to that, I was heavily involved in sports administration and on some committees that were allied to the county council, the local government, like housing and corporate, and the overriding committee that looked after the voluntary sector in my state, my county, 65,000 people. It's known as the PPN, the Public Participation Network. And that came into being in 2014 with a lot of European influences, a flat structure, if you like. And I continued on that for, as I say, I was in business for 30 years in my own right. And then I pivoted into invoice discounting. And the firm I was involved with, what we did was we bought as little as one invoice, if that's all an entity needed. And this was particularly useful for startups. And the idea was that you would support a startup for maybe by purchasing 1, 2, or 3 invoices, but eventually that startup would create their own track record. And even before asking, the bank they're dealing with would notice the turnover in their account and would approach them eventually. Did they want more finance, cheaper finance, obviously, cheaper banking finance. So it was an unusual occupation in that you were doing yourself out of a job. If you were successful, the less they needed you. But that was the success. That was the idea of it, that you would sustain a business for maybe 9 months, and then the bank would notice that they had a track record. Then they were paying their debtors, they had their tax affairs in order, and they could get more conventional finance, which was indeed a lot cheaper. But they wouldn't have got that far without our help. And that when these entities were continually looking for our help, but then they had a problem, and you had to identify that problem. And in many cases, it was simple enough. And that encouraged me. It might be a simple thing like that they weren't actually collecting their money on time, simple as that, or they mightn't be looking after the more profitable end of their business. They might be concentrating on something that wasn't returning as much. But that brought me into an interest in the whole sphere of consulting, because I did enjoy it. I got a kick out of helping people, and I'm very proud of the people I did help and the firms I did help. And I got into the consulting end of things. I did a bit of study on that. And about 9 months, 10 modules. And then I got involved with another consulting business, which put a lot of emphasis on the visual, on the Venn diagram, if you like, and that end of it that I hadn't thought of. But a lot of us think visual. As children, we think in pictures before we are taught how to read and write, and that's from people who are artistic retain that. But the visual is, as one person explained to me, that if you start on your Venn diagram, the diagram will eventually talk to you, that the spaces in between will become obvious. And it's a great way of explaining something, and a great way of for myself to retain knowledge about a certain topic. So I had a general interest in leadership, and that's what I concentrated on. But that's a vast. When you talk about leadership, I mean, that's infinite. What you could, and you have to specialize. And I thought about it for a while, and I realized that, especially in sports administration and in the other areas, that it's meetings are where decisions are made. And at GOCP, we first and foremost concentrate on the meeting, let it be the board meeting or the team leaders meeting. And it doesn't matter whether it's not-for-profit or whether it's a corporate entity or the uniformed services, they all have meetings. Some of them far too many meetings, but they all have meetings. And I always, something that hit me actually in recent times was that a friend, as all good detective novels start, it was a quiet evening in the office, but it was for me. I was concentrating on something when the phone rang, and a friend of mine asked me for the link. Had I got the link to a meeting, an online meeting that was to happen in an hour's time? So I had to tell him gently that I was no longer on that committee, so I wouldn't be getting a link. And he thanked me, and we parted with a few pleasantries. But I was surprised at the emotion that I felt. It was one of complete relief that I didn't have to attend that particular meeting. And the meeting would not have been contentious. It would not have been a problem. But it would have been an hour and a half out of my life. And it would have gone through, it would have been a formulaic sort of a meeting. And I would have very little input into decision making. But it surprised me the relief that I felt at not having to attend that meeting. And I think all meetings can be improved. And I a lot of what I teach, I have encountered throughout a long career going to meetings. And GOCP then was born out of that. Governance, opportunity, community, and processes. And I think it's the governance and the processes that most people forget about. I really advise people to have some sort of a memorandum of understanding, to have something documented that you can refer to when you hit a problem. And it doesn't have to be written in stone, it can be changed. And I think documentation that the group, the team can refer to is of an immense help. But meetings in general, the leadership needs to get everyone around the table involved. The team has to be preferably It's not always, but preferably gender balanced and diverse, because the mixture of ideas leads to better decisions, better ideas. And when that happens, but the CEO or the leader of the team needs to know how everyone is thinking around the table. And it's the space between the bars that keeps the tiger in. So it's really between meetings is a very important time for the CEO. And the CEO or team leader should set aside time to have one-to-ones, however casual, with each member of the board, and to get into their heads and to get their ideas, because some of the very brightest people are not very comfortable at throwing an idea out there. They don't like rejection, and these people, if you're employing people at that level and with that level of intellect, you need to make use of that. And if that means one-to-ones, well, you better have them. And a good rule of thumb is to have a one-to-one with each member over a period of time, and then start again, have it in rotation, and make sure you get around them all. One thing you want to avoid is, and it's natural how it happens, where you would depend, especially in a crisis, on 2 or 3 people that you know well. But the rest of the team realize that, and you need to avoid that, because that results in groupthink. You all clap each other on the back, and you think you've made the right decision. And in some cases, the rest of the team even accept it. They accept, well, these guys are making the decisions, because that's all the way it has always been. But these are some of the pitfalls that I've encountered in meetings, and that we should try to avoid.
Definitely. No, definitely, Gerald. And I know obviously we'll go deep into how we can avoid them. I think, it brings a lot of clarity. Sorry, I got a little bit of sun here, into what GOCP does, and obviously where your journey led to it. Where you could see the ability to empower these people, where a lot of the wrong decisions, were made, is obviously within these meetings, how they're run, who is there, why are they there, and, what responsibility or outcome is each individual pushing for, throughout that meeting. So I'm curious, taking a step back, obviously right before GOCP, right, you mentioned a lot of the business that you did was a little bit more in the startup world, and right, helping people with invoices, where essentially, you're fulfilling and covering some of those invoices before they could go get traditional financing, right?
Yeah.
When you worked with those companies, at that early stage, did you often see that there were common challenges that were preventing all of them from, getting and becoming more successful to get to traditional financing, with meeting being one of those? Or were there allotment of different reasons as to why some were successful and, other areas that they needed to improve?
Yeah, I'd say that they had their own strengths and weaknesses, and none of us knows everything about everything. And they concentrated, I guess, on their strengths. Some of them are very good at sales, and that brings its own problems. If you overdo it at sales, well, then you need product to produce whatever you're selling, and that requires finance. So they might be good at sales and weak on the financial end of it. What I would encourage now, maybe I'm better able now, is for the entity to have a long-term vision, to be clear in their minds what it is they want to achieve, where they want to be in 5 or 10 years, and to have maybe an exit strategy. And what often happens is they get bogged down, and this is understandable. It's happened to me. You get bogged down in the financial and the lack of finance and the worry about paying bills, and it becomes a treadmill, surviving week to week, rather than thinking of a long-term vision. And some of these people would say, that's all very well, but I have to pay the boys at the end of the week. long-term vision isn't much good to me there, but that is essential to have that in your mind. We'll say the great entrepreneurs, that Henry Ford had an ideal of producing a car for the masses. That was his first. It wasn't to make millions or billions. He did in relative terms, but that was his ideal. It wasn't about the money. And
Correct.
what I would try to instill in the startup is to keep track of the ideal of the point and the distance you're trying to reach, and to keep track of the basics. Then the financial basics, and collecting your money is one of those.
Certainly.
Hmm.
No, and I think it's very true. I think, where a lot of startups or any, early conception company where they struggle, right, is on that alignment of vision. And like you said, the first year or two might be what some call the survival years, where they feel, why does the vision matter if I can't afford to eat or, pay my rent, right, or all these things. But what they miss is that vision's the most important, right, even in those survival stages, because it enables you to compound, and that compounding effect in a particular direction is one of those things that allows you to realize value, much quicker. Even though it might have taken you 3 months to get that first customer, now you can rinse and repeat that value versus, yes, it only took you 2 weeks to get this customer, but this service is one that you're not looking to ever do again, right? So was it worth derailing your entire vision, right, or organization just to make $10,000, or would it have been better to stay at, your day job for an extra month until you really found the person that you were looking for? And I think that's just a good, emphasis on things that even we struggled with the early days of our business. You feel like, our vision is super clean and tight. And then anytime an opportunity comes, you kind of slowly tweak what your vision was to make sure that opportunity fits inside those walls. Brandon, do you see this, often when you started, or do you see it with a lot of, we still see it with customers we work with as they try to enter a new space? So I'm curious your insights onto, these early stage of companies and just that importance of vision, and communicating that.
Yes, it's difficult. It's not easy when you're starting out. You have a vision, but as you start walking, you see that there are some booby traps in the actual road, or pitfalls, or potholes. So you have to be agile enough. And I think willingness comes into it, a big part of being willing to maybe just use, the wind, to your advantage, not fight against it. So if it's a very windy day, which it is in Ireland some days, I know I've been there myself. So, it's tough to walk against it. But if you walk kind of just at a 45-degree angle with it, it gets so much easier, So, and it's the same thing in starting out in business. I love how you mentioned the visual piece of this, because I was just doing an exercise yesterday with my daughter. And when you put pen or whatever you write with to paper, right? I know we all have the computers and we have the apps and we can do all these to-do lists and everything else like that. But when it really matters, get a pen, get a piece of paper, and just write, map it. It can be on a napkin. Those are some of the most prolific moments in my business career right there, right? Because there's something that happens when I actually move my hand along with what I'm writing. It's almost like cementing it in my brain, And I'll just say one more thing. With the meetings, I know we touched on the meetings. We're probably going to touch on that later as well. I was on a meeting the other day. There were 4 people on there. Everybody on that call made a minimum of $100,000. That's $289 an hour. Some made 3 times that, right? I'm on the call here. We're chit-chatting for 15 minutes. We literally just spent $1,200.
Yeah.
$1,200 to have 4. There were supposed to be 5. We literally spent. So do the reverse math, especially if you're a small business. Like, how much does each employee cost? And I'm talking in dollars here, and I know you're in a different currency over there. But for the dollars, just count how many people. If you have 10 people, a team meeting on there, 10 people, and they each make $50,000. You're still at $1,100 to actually run that meeting, or more than that. So do the reverse math. in anything that you do, especially in terms of those meetings. So back to you, Brett.
Definitely. No, I think, a lot of people don't realize the marginal impact that a particular activity can have, right? And then you increase a high frequency on that. So a lot of people say, let's just have a quick daily meeting, 15, 20 minutes a day, just so then we don't have 7 individual meetings. But then what really happens is you end up having your 7 individual meetings in that one meeting. And a lot of people are, watching a round robin take place where they only needed to be there for the 2 minutes as part of their round robin.
A lot of the time, my advice would be to have less meetings. Typically sales meetings happen every Monday morning because that's the way we always did things around here. But the guys not alone are earning substantial sums, but they would be better off working. And most of them, after the weekend, they probably have been thinking about their sales calls over the weekend, and they just want to get at it. And conversely, then, when something like Pfizer or Moderna are hit with producing a vaccine, well, then you have to have a meeting every second night to see how the team is going. But because this is big stuff and there's a time limit, but we have to know how the thing is going. So it's important, I believe, the rhythm of your business is more important than the calendar or the quarter. It's have the meetings as they're needed, and have 2 or 3 meetings in succession if you're meeting a particular challenge. But don't have meetings for the sake of having meetings.
One preference I like to have is if I'm not needed in the meeting, but it's important that I know of what went on in the meeting, just record the meeting and I listen to it at 1.5 times the speed, right? Or two times the speed. I've just trained everything to go 1.5 minimum in anything that I do. And I can just quickly go through it. So a 20-minute meeting only is 10 minutes, or a 30, so I'm always, I'm listening and I'm attuned and my ears are trained to listen faster. And I equate meetings to like kind of disciplining with kids: shorter, stronger, faster. I think that is shorter, stronger, faster, right? If you go into a meeting and the meeting time is set for 15 minutes and everybody knows that the meeting time starts on time and it ends on time. If you're late, you don't come in. That's it. You missed it, because it's going to be short, snappy. It's going to be a fireworks show. And then 15 minutes, we cut off. So everyone is on point. They're on game. If you make a meeting for an hour, you know what? The meeting's going to last an hour because it's going to start off with chit chat, get into the meeting, have a crystal clear agenda, and just bang down those things. And everyone can go out and socialize later. Text each other, chat, FaceTime after the meeting. Go do what you want with your personal friendships, but business needs to get done quickly, especially with small business, which we're talking about today.
And there can be no distractions either. Exactly. Even a mobile phone. If you're having coffee with somebody and there's a mobile phone that hasn't worked in 10 years sitting on the table, that's taking everyone is waiting for that to beep or to call. That's a distraction.
Yes.
That shouldn't be there, and it certainly shouldn't be at a meeting either. Focus on what the meeting is about.
I do have a quick question for you. What do you think about, and I like both of you to answer this, video versus non-video? In the world of meetings today, we've been in meetings for 2 years now online, at least here in the US, with COVID and everything else. We've been online. What's your view on having video on versus not? Does it really matter to you at this point? I mean, or do you like to have the video on during meetings? What are both of your thoughts?
What do you think, Gerald? I'll let you go first.
To have the online, you're talking purely about online meetings.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Purely now that everything's gotten more remote. Yeah. Do you think video improves a meeting or adds a distraction?
I think the video should be on because one of the disadvantages from a physical meeting is that a lot of your communication is body language, and that's difficult enough to get online. But certainly, you would need I think the video needs to be on. Yes.
Good point.
Yeah. No, I think it's true. I think it took some time. You want to sit without video on in your morning because you might be more casually dressed, or there are internal calls for updates, right? But I think. I agree with you, Gerald. I think a lot of things are left unsaid when all you can hear is the audio, right? Many times, You can give, responsibilities or discuss a particular strategy or creative approach, with somebody all without being able to see their facial expression, and then say, does that make sense? And they are saying yes, but if you could see their eyes, you'd see that they're visually still processing it, or, maybe they have a question, or you can just see, that body language. And I think, like you said, and I'm sure there's quotes out there about it, but I think we speak, like 70% of what we're really saying, in our body language, and the 30% is, what we're saying out our mouth. And sometimes they can often conflict one another, just because of, confidence, or because we're still processing the information that we received. Is that something that you often see, Gerald, and just how, there could be insufficient communication when that body language is missing?
Oh, I think definitely. I know we often, you often, people often turn off their video cams because of the connectivity problems, in Ireland anyway at times. But it's not, I would prefer everyone to have the video on. That would be my preference. And I think people don't see the necessity to dress as formally on video as they do in a physical meeting. Don't ask me why, but it doesn't really matter. But I'd prefer to have the video on. Yes, I think you get a tone, you get a better idea of the communications.
So one thing that I've had to do with the video is actually practice smiling, right? Because in a lot of meetings, I don't want to be there. I'm like, what the heck? What am I doing here? This should have been recorded. Like, I don't need to be here. I have minimal input, just like you were saying in the beginning. You started out like, hey, if this is not something that really pertains to me. Yes, it's important that I know about it. And my facial expression is just showing my whole thing. My shoulders are down. I'm here. I'm looking over here. I'm looking over there. And so I actually make it a cognitive thought to actually smile when I'm on. And I'm practicing right now as we're going through this. Again, I'm going through and I'm like, smile through every situation. So it truly does make a big difference when you just have a little bit of a smile in there, and just think about it. So this is all anybody can see is right here. So just make the most of it.
Obviously, they can still see you when you're not involved, so.
Exactly.
And that really is when you know whether people are interested or not. I agree with you there, all right. But the other thing about online meetings that the physical meeting, often you had to drive to them. You had to get there. And the time in the car you spent thinking about the meeting and how you were going to approach it. But now online meetings sometimes come one after the other, and you don't get that break. And people have discovered now that they have to give a break to people, to get your thoughts together at least. And I hear people talking about 4 or 5 meetings a day. I'm not sure is it possible? I know you can go through the motions, but is it possible to have an effective meeting one after the other? You do need time to prepare and time to process, and that should be built into your day. And that's one disadvantage of the online, is that they're so easy to organize.
Correct. I think that's such a good point, Joe, because before, when you mentioned rhythm, right, there's like layers of rhythm all around a meeting. There's the rhythm of every individual stakeholder, right? And are they coming in ready for that meeting? Like you said, have they prepared? Do they know their thoughts? Do they know where they're going to contribute when their time comes, right? And then there's also the rhythm of the company, which is, did we already discuss, what we're going to be doing for the next month? Let's not have 3 meetings a week, just recap the same thing and kill everybody's momentum, right? And what you just said around the meetings is funny. It's one of the things that I've realized probably like after the first 2 months, into COVID, because everybody has the virtual links now where they can schedule their time in, or, get 15 minutes from you, which always turns into 30. and then you put 7 calls in a row back to back because you want to be able to get to your main tasks. So from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. you're on back to back phone calls. It's just very interesting. So is that something that you find, Brandon, as well, to maintain your momentum? Did you catch yourself where you were getting way too many back to back, and then after 5 calls you're trying to remember all the notes from each call, or did you keep them separated from the very beginning?
I block out time. There you go, Bri. Thanks. I think when you were talking, your video was messed up for a sec, but you seem to be better now when you come back on. Yeah, it's all good. The audio is perfect. But yeah, so I just started to block out time in my calendar. It's great to use tools like a Calendly or something else like that, or Google Calendar, or whatever tool you use. And I just block out time. I call it mindset time. I call it family time, and it's during the day, right? It's just hours of block. So when people go to schedule an appointment, they see I'm not available. And those blocks, because otherwise people are constantly putting stuff on my calendar. I'm like, this isn't even important to me. Like, what is this? I have to maintain focus on what's important. I think this is vital to a small business success, an entrepreneur success, a startup founding team success, is to stay away from the shiny objects and the next best thing and everything. Stick to the core foundations that got you successful. Stick to the core foundation. I know you mentioned Ford when we first jumped on here. That was a core foundation built around standard operating procedures, which you also mentioned, Gerald, in the actual SOPs. You didn't say SOPs, but you stated that those directions on what you need to do when something occurs. Time is important. I'm not going to say time is money, money's time, all that type of stuff. I'm just saying in my life, I have a family, I have kids, we have kids, I have a wife, I have other responsibilities outside of work. Yes, work takes up a huge portion of my life. It is important to me. It keeps the lights turns on. It allows me to drive fancy cars and have the things that I want. But in reality, I need balance. And I think for any small business owner, it comes down to balance, and blocking out those calendar times is super important for me.
And you probably, if you're that advanced in business, you should really have a chief of staff who knows that and who plans the day for you and includes family time in that, because it's not much good to you if it takes up all your time. That's not the idea.
Yeah. So how does a startup or small business founder get over and beyond the chief of staff to actually get on somebody's calendar? That is a key question here. I don't know if we want to dive into this now or later or what, but there's always a gatekeeper, and sometimes a gatekeeper is pre-qualifying you to either book an appointment or not based upon their own ideas and their own premises. So it can definitely be a slippery slope either way.
That's when you're looking for an appointment.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, and I've encountered the gatekeepers, and they're I tell you one thing, they're excellent at their jobs. That's preventing people. Sometimes the snail mail could be as effective as any, and if a good written letter directly to the person you're looking for, because they get so few of them now, they might take notice of it. Or else take a leaf out of do a study of Chris Voss's his negotiating skills. It is a tough one to get through the gatekeeper. Certainly, it is a tough one.
There's been two big changes with what's been going on the past 2 years. And that is, one, I used to be able to call a person in their office. And I would call on a Saturday just to leave a message because I knew they weren't going to pick up, right? So Monday morning, they would have a message on their voicemail. That was the thing. I would call late at night after hours when I knew I'd be able to leave a voicemail because most of the time they listen to the voicemail. But now that phone is forwarded to their cell phone. So when I call on a Saturday, they're actually picking up. They're at their daughter's grandkids' soccer game, whatever, football game, whatever. And it's actually damaging the relationship. One other thing that I used to do is send FedEx. and an actual letter, FedEx. But now everything is sent to a central place, scanned in, and forwarded to the person via email, so it doesn't have the same weight. So, as a small business owner, as an entrepreneur, starter founder, I always looking for different ways. So I'm really enjoying the conversation, though, and what I've learned so far. I just want to circle back on one thing you said, too, is gender balanced in the meetings. I think that is so important. That DEI, is it DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion? That's a huge market.
Yes, yeah, it's a big. It's obviously, I think it's taken very, very seriously in the United States, where there are actually laws about boards. If they want to be accredited, they have to have they have to prove the figures that they are gender balanced and inclusive and diverse. And it will eventually, it is becoming more important. It is important in Europe as well.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of places they're 50-50. They have to be. When I mentioned before the public participation network, the reason I mentioned that is that the ideas for that came from Europe itself. It was the Minister Hogan, that brought them in. He eventually became a European commissioner, but this was there was a few interesting things that it had to be geographically balanced and gender balanced within the state or the county, and it was strictly 50-50. But the other thing, the interesting thing, is the secretariat, which had about 8 people. It was called a secretariat, these strange names we never heard of before. But the chair of the meeting rotated. So each of the 8 chaired the meeting in turn. And I didn't realize how this would work, but I found it incredibly positive, especially if a new member joined the team. When the meeting would finish, well, who's going to chair the next meeting? You would point to the new member, and they were in straight away, and they were accepted straight away. They were actually chairing the meeting straight away in a month's time, a few weeks' time. But they didn't. Normally, they would take 2 or 3 meetings to find their feet and to get to know how it operated. But by chairing the meeting, they were thrown in at the deep end, and I thought it was very, very effective. Nobody was in control of anything. There were natural leaders, all right, but that I found fascinating. I had never come across it before, and perhaps. Is there a need for the same person to chair every meeting? I don't know. I've lost the thread of what you were saying there, but there's equal challenges with established businesses as well. Startups have certain advantages in that nobody cares. Well, it's not that they don't care. Making mistakes is taken as natural, as part of the process. Everyone does their best to get the thing off the ground. Everyone is involved. There's no real divisions or titles. But once the business grows, then when you have layers and layers of managers and executives and gatekeepers, as we talked about, some people then believe, rightly in a lot of cases, that the less mistakes they make, the more chances they have of progressing, and they lose the drive that got them there in the beginning, and they lose a lot of good ideas because people are afraid to take a chance on something. And of course, if you haven't made a mistake, well, you haven't tried very hard. This is the answer to that. It's if you haven't failed, you haven't tried very hard, is the saying. But when the company becomes established, there are barriers to progression if it follows the standards that are set. But gender balance is vitally important. It doesn't exist everywhere. And I know men really appreciate a gender balanced meeting, and I've been told time and again that women think differently, and it does help the process. And Ireland was a very in the 1960s we were mostly white and mostly Catholic on the island of Ireland, and now 15% of my little county, 15% of the population were not born in Ireland. So we have a third of the people who work in our capital city were not born in Ireland. And that's very tech driven as well, with the Googles and the Facebooks and the Twitter. They're all have offices, European offices in our capital city. So we have seen that change, and we need that diversity on our committees as well. And when you're dealing with people from Asian communities, they have a different outlook as well, and they bring different positivity to the meeting, a different way of looking at things. And if you look at a problem from every different angle, let it be gender or race or ethnic origins, you will come to the best conclusions, I believe. You will from that milieu of ideas, and you will get ideas that you wouldn't have come up with yourself in a million years, as to say. So but the gender balance, the gender equality is very, very important, because 51% of the population is female. So you ignore the mature pearl. So
definitely. No, I couldn't agree more. I think, the easiest way that we like to put, diversity too, is we're all just a culmination of our experiences, right? Which can be based on race, right? Based on religion or ethnicity, right? Those are just different reasons as to why you have different experiences, from birth to your early adolescence, which then molds you into this, right? That's why sometimes people say, guys that were captains or you're natural leaders because you were always trying to take a leadership role in sports, right? Or just these different experiences that kind of let your true inner person come out, and not the person you try to start to form yourself into, as you get older. And I think some of the biggest things that we get away from, diversity is, like you said, the perspectives into the decision-making process, right? Which is one thing, right? If your company is just based here and you're trying to solve the Henry Ford challenge, right? Or the Tesla challenge of how are we going to build, the best electric car, right? Or the most sustainable outcome, whatever it may be. All these different backgrounds have tried to, create different products with different materials, right? Just based on their geographical location, right? That all had the same outcome. And there's all these nuances that they have built in that they're bringing into that early stage decision-making, which obviously saves you on iterating, right? If you have all Irish Catholics in the room, we're coming from one collective background of experiences, which, whether we like to admit it or not, we have a biased lens of how we're looking at this challenge in front of us. We can't get on, the other side of it.
Literally and metaphorically, a hierarchical setup.
Yes, exactly. And I think, where you see it start to shift, or where I've seen it for larger organizations where they really see it, is not so much if you're just a US-based company, right? But more so if you're a US-based company that then starts to grow, where you would like to form an international presence, right? And like one of the biggest case studies is like Starbucks, right? What works here in the US, it's an amazing company. You go to try to open up a Starbucks in Asian countries, right? Where tea, and they're not looking for this fast transactional experience like we are in the US, where it's, can I use the mobile app and pick up my cappuccino without speaking to one another? Right? They use tea and those rituals to form deeper connections, discuss deeper topics. And if you're fast, you're actually being, very rude culturally, right? But if you didn't come from that culture, you'd say, let's just open up a Starbucks, without changing anything, and it would most likely fail, right? So I think a lot of it kind of shifts us into the perspectives, but also not everything has to be the centralized decision-making machine. You can start to fan out and, empower different leaders that have that different knowledge to decentralize the decisions and be successful in those buckets rather than trying to be this, centralized power of management. Is that something that you see or, feel
Yeah,
is
definitely. And
accurate for larger companies?
in fact, it came up in conversation with a lady from Mexico just in the last week. And, we were talking about the internet and online, this, that, and online, the other. And she said, well, you have to realize that we're not as connected in Mexico as you are. So that if you want to do business in Mexico, you better know that. Like, and going back to the car branding, one or two car makers have made bad mistakes because the name of the vehicle, the name of, we call it a Ford Cortina in Ireland, but the name of the vehicle didn't translate that well into the local language. It was a rather rude word, but nobody bothered to check that out before and it was only a matter of changing the name. And they wondered why sales didn't come up to their expectations. But they just didn't, they hadn't checked out their market, and they hadn't talked to anyone who would have pointed that out straight away.
Definitely.
And that definitely, even speaking to people in New York, I find words are very important, and sometimes there is what I say is doesn't come across as what was meant. If you say if you're free this evening, it means are you available? But they're more or less, I'm €1,000 an hour. I'm not free. So better keep the conversation short. So, but there is a slight, everyone has their own. The language has built up over the years, and you need to be cognizant of. As I think it was the CEO of MasterCard said, you don't think you can set up in Asia without having a presence there. First of all, having an office there and having somebody who is in tune with the local population, whatever chance you have. It's not one that's going to work online until you have a presence there. And I'm sure they have to study our way of doing things as well when they try and do business with us. We're all different.
Definitely. Yeah, I think, although barriers have gotten easier to overcome, right? Like connecting with someone in Ireland, doing business foreign is easier than ever before. You don't have to get on a plane, fly there, live there for a month to establish relationships. You can connect with them. Just because that friction is removed, doesn't mean that there's still not that planning that goes into the process or the empathy that needs to be there to truly understand someone, right? And I think the majority of the traits we're talking about is what makes, a good conscious leader, right? Whether they're trying to be a leader of the people or just of themselves, right? Which are kind of two different layers of leaders that we can talk about. It's just having that consciousness. And as you go forward more, whether it's in particular meetings or your business, right, that's what can lead to keeping that rhythm, like you said, Gerald, right? And that momentum in the business. You can't become so hard and fast. Just because something worked once doesn't mean it will work again. And you might have just had the right timing on something.
You have to be agile. I'm reminded too with this conversation about a very successful guy in the business. He was transferred to the Pacific somewhere, where every day was sunshine every day. He really, something like the Bahamas. I don't think it was the Bahamas, but it was. But he'd walk into the office every morning and he'd say, "Isn't that a grand day?" And nobody understood why he said this, because every day was the same. Every day was a grand day until some of them visited Ireland, and then they realized what he meant, because grand days came across so seldom. But that was his greeting to everyone. Isn't that a grand day? And they got 6 months of that until the monsoons came. But anyway, that's language and taking taking people out of their habitat, I suppose.
Certainly. And I think, kind of around the meetings and, just overall leadership, we've kind of been alluding into it, Gerald. I know there's a story that you've shared on LinkedIn, and that's kind of a basis at some of the way that, you consult and help people gain the perspectives for the individuals and companies that you work with, right? And I know the story that we refer to it is called the nuclear option story, I believe. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. I've well, that was that's what I called it as. And when I started on my consulting career late in life, I checked out others in a similar business, and the usual names, Simon Sinek and Tony Robbins and them all. But the one that really struck me was the story of Captain David Marquet. And when I retell it, and I tell it now, I think it sums up an awful lot of what is good about leadership. David Marquet was 17 years in the U.S. Navy, and of course, he was working towards getting his own command, and eventually he got his own command. He was to command the USS Olympia, a nuclear-powered submarine. But as is tradition in the US Navy, he got his command 12 months before time. And that 12 months was spent studying the Olympia from stem to stern. The wiring, the plumbing, the nuclear reactor, he knew it inside out. And there's a quiz show in the UK, Mastermind. Well, if he was on Mastermind, his speciality would be the Olympia, because nobody knew it better than himself, even the people that built it. So he was full of confidence when he went to Pearl Harbor to pick up take control of the USS Olympia and its 165 crew, and he knew a fair bit about them through records as well. But of course, as in life, things don't always work out according to plan. And he got the equivalent of good news and bad news when he got to Pearl Harbor. He was told he was to command a submarine, all right, but it wasn't to be the Olympia, it was to be the USS Santa Fe. The Santa Fe was about to go to sea when its captain had a year left, but he decided to abandon and to go to take up a civilian role. So the Santa Fe needed a captain, and they decided to switch Marquet. Now the Santa Fe was a newer generation Los Angeles type submarine. Now I don't know what that means either, but it was an awful lot different from the Olympia. There could have been 30 years in the difference. It may have looked similar on the outside, but inside it was completely different layout. Marquet's studies were no use to him now when he took over the Olympia, but he felt he was the captain. He'd give the orders, he'd make a job of it. The other little caveat was that the Santa Fe had the worst performing crew in the US Navy, and there were but a lot of jokes because of mistakes they made in the past. So he took over the Santa Fe, and during trials anyway, one of the trials they do is that they shut down the nuclear reactor. They're traveling on battery power alone, and the idea is that the crew gets the nuclear reactor up and running again, and nearly everyone on board is involved. There's 135 on this particular ship, all men at the time. So they're all busily engaged in getting the nuclear reactor up and running again, and they're just about being pushed along by this electric motor. Marquet had this idea that he was thinking outside the box. He was in the bridge or the control room. Beside him was the navigator, an officer, and in front of the periscope, with his back to them, was the helmsman, who was looking at a bank of screens and dots and dashes, and his job was to make sure they didn't run into anything, especially a Russian submarine, I guess. But anyway, they were there, and Marquet had he started thinking outside the box, and he said, if this thing was going a bit quicker, the lads would know that the batteries were running down that more quickly, and they'd have to up their work ethic. They'd have to get this nuclear reactor going that little bit quicker as well. They'd have to be a bit more pressure on them, because if the batteries died, well, they all died. So he says, that's what we'll do. So, and he even discussed it with the navigator. So he said, yeah, 2/3 ahead. So the navigator repeated the order, 2/3 ahead. The helmsman says, aye, aye. And nothing really happened. And even on the modern submarines, there should have been a bell like the World War II movies. And there should have been some slight indication that you were going a little bit quicker, but nothing happened. And Marquet didn't particularly, he thought something, he saw there was something odd about the body language of the helmsman, even though his back was to him. So he says, is everything all right, Helm? So the young fella said, well, everything is fine, Captain. And thank you for asking, Captain. But I got to tell you, Captain, there ain't no 2/3 setting on this submarine. And of course, this wasn't Marquet's fault, because every submarine he had ever been on, or every submarine he had ever studied, had a 2/3 setting. But for some reason, they didn't bother, in electric mode anyway, on the Santa Fe. But this order had been heard by everyone, so he was feeling a bit foolish. And he had to ask the $6 million question, and he turned to his navigator and he said, Nav, you were on this vessel for 4 years. You knew there was no 2/3 setting. Yes, sir. But yet you told the helmsman to go at 2/3. And if you knew there was no setting, why did you do that? Could you tell me that? And the navigator said, without batting an eyelid, he said, because those were my orders, sir. You ordered me to, sir. So Marquet then knew he had a problem. He had... Anyway, the nuclear reactor got up and running, and they were at normal speed, and he called all the officers into the war room, which doubled up as the mess, and he outlined his problem. He had a year to study the Olympia. He had 2 weeks to study the Santa Fe. He didn't know the workings of it, and everyone was blindly following orders, no matter how daft they were, because that's was the tradition in the US Navy, a hierarchical, purely hierarchical tradition. The captain gives the orders, everyone obeys them. And the navigator was doing that out of the playbook. That was his training. So one young fellow suggested, maybe, Captain, if you stop giving orders, that it would help. So I think a bit of humor always helps. And in a way, that's what they did do. They did away with the traditional thing was permission to, sir. Permission to, sir. Permission to submerge, sir. Permission to fire, sir. Whatever action they were taking, that was the normal thing to say, permission to, sir. And of course, that meant that sir took all the responsibility for whatever was done. That was changed to, I intend to, sir. And that brought the responsibility back to the person. It pushed responsibility down through the ranks. And when you think about it logically, each individual on the submarine was trained to do his particular job. They were experts in their little domain. So who better to know what to do? But they had to obviously explain to the captain that they were about to do whatever they were to do. So I intend to, sir. And that became the mantra. There was an awful lot of other changes. Turn the Ship Around is the book that Marquet wrote, and he wrote it 10 years after leaving the Santa Fe. But another change he made, in summary, was that he got fed up of people blaming other people. They did this and they did that. So he banned the word they. So the engineer, for instance, wanted to tell him that they wouldn't be leaving port the next day because they ordered the wrong part. But under the new regime, he couldn't say that. So he says he had to, we ordered the wrong part, and he had to walk away then. He didn't particularly like saying that. But the blame game was over as far as Marquet was concerned. And that and the other bureaucracy was changed. If a sailor needed 3 days leave of absence, if there was an emergency at home or whatever, he would have to. It would. It, in the old regime, it would go through 8 different people, up to the captain, and then down through the 8 again. Bear in mind, there's only 135 people on the vessel, and everyone is on top of each other. So Marquet says that doesn't have to happen anymore. As long as there's someone to replace the guy and do his job, the next in command can authorize it. There's no need for this bureaucracy. Now, he actually he got people who were actually very interested in this came to visit him. Covey is the name I was trying to think. Stephen Covey, the late Stephen Covey, had written extensively about this type of leadership, and he actually came to visit them on the Santa Fe to see how Marquet was doing what he was doing. But in 12 months, the US Navy came to evaluate, just a normal evaluation, and the crew went from worst to first. The best score that any crew had received ever since records began in the US Navy. That's the kind of change that his regime made. And the retention rates, when 35 guys had finished their 3-year stint, all 35 opted to come back to the Santa Fe. So the retention rates, but what he was most proud of was the high percentage of officers who received their own commands from the ship and did very well in the Navy themselves. But it changed it, and really, when I tell the story, it sends a light bulb. It's a light bulb moment for most people, as it was for me. I really enjoyed. I looked at it first on YouTube and then read the book, but it's well worth a visit to Marquet. He's easy to get there, but it really emphasizes the point that leadership is a choice. It's not a rank. You know, you can get leaders at all levels, and in a battle situation, that's what you need. That's what you know. And these guys are trained for battle. Hopefully, they'll never have to go to war, but that's what they're trained for. But I always had was disillusioned about the hierarchical system, and I got more disillusioned after Marquet's experiences, I must say. But that was the Marquet story. It really it's one I love repeating. I love telling, and I think it tells it tells a good point.
It definitely does. I mean, I think, you know, the biggest thing that at least I took away from it, and Brandon, I'll go to you in a second, but, you know, one of the biggest thing is what we were talking about before is, you know, not everything is going back to the center point, right? There's always going to be certain decisions that you should have a rule for, you know, like hiring, right? We'll always go to the department head. Maybe he'll do all the interviews, but just before you finalize the candidate, there's that third interview with all of management, if it's for a management role. Right. But you don't need to get involved into every level where that guy knows who he's looking for. Right. He knows who he needs to support his team. And then, yes, at the end, you want to ensure you're getting a good cultural fit, right, that you can meet the salary formalities, right, and some of those other responsibilities that's up to management to ensure. But when it comes to the skill sets in particular and who's really making sure you're getting the right person in the right seat, right? Why would you have management oversee and say, I don't like these candidates if they're not really sure what you're looking for in your team? And the other part that I like that you alluded to too, Gerald, right, is a lot of leaders, you don't need to have to want to be a manager or, you know, an executive, right? There's just leading with confidence and decision-making makes you a leader within your own role. Right. It doesn't need to be responsible for others or telling other people what to do and sitting back. That's what makes you a leader. I think that can be, you know, misconstrued sometimes into, there's a lot of, independent, entrepreneurial driven people that lead their position and they drive a lot within the organization, although they may not be coordinating 25 different people and helping develop those people, right? But by doing their job and taking responsibility for the areas they can make decisions, you get that progression and you get that innovation that you were saying before, Gerald, is often stifled by that centralized approach, because now they're sitting there saying, do I have permission to do this? Can I spend 10 hours researching this new topic that I think could be good for us, but it might be a waste of time, right? And instead they can say, I intend to, go research this new technology because I think it's going to become a big need for our clients, right? And they're telling you the reasons as to why they're doing things, where they think it perceives value. And I think outside of, giving them the accountability to be able to do that and control their own hours, it's also providing them with that thought process of forming intent before they take actions, right? And I think that was one of the biggest things I got away from you is, whenever we hire new people, it's not always trying to train them, right? You want, yes, like file structures and, this is how we store things, some of the hard skill sets, but more you want to just get them in a good framework where they understand here are some of the few constraints, but outside of that, I want you to be fully creative in this process and trying to drive us forward. Don't wait for me to tell you like, oh, go look into this, right? Because now you're thinking for everybody within your entire organization and you're stifling their growth is at least, what I took away from it. And Brandon, obviously love to get your thoughts as well. And then Gerald can tell us if we're way off or not.
Yeah, I just because you call yourself a leader doesn't mean you're a leader. I mean, that's one thing that I know, especially in small to mid-sized businesses, and even getting up to the larger sized businesses. A lot of people that are assigned a title, but a title really doesn't. In today's environment, I say within the past 5 or 10 years, it's social capital. Is really what it comes down to. Is not so much having that title. There are a lot of hidden influencers and hidden leaders of entire teams. And at the end of that story, one of the biggest takeaways was the success of those 8 or 10 gentlemen, women, whatever, that took on new leadership roles. And they took on new leadership roles because they were leading. They may not have had the title, but they were empowered to lead. And that's what I tell everybody, at least that I know, like just do the very best you can every single day. Create authority for yourself, build influence for yourself by doing the right things for the right reasons. If someone's laying there in the middle of the road with a broken leg, take the next decisive action that's going to help the situation. Don't ask if you can help. Go and help. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than not doing it all, or whatever that saying is, but you have to be careful too. Right. There's certain legal things that come up in a situation like that. So you do need to be aware, but I think that with the proper training and I always like letting people know what the conditions are which drive the rules, such as this rule is in place because of this liability or because of XYZ. And then they can think faster that way rather than, hey, this is the rule, I need to do it. This is the rule because of XYZ and it puts us in a tough position. We're not able to do that. So we need to get another person's, I won't even say approval, I would say input. Like go to a team member. It doesn't have to be somebody higher up in the company. It just needs to be somebody, a peer at the same level that you are, and say, hey, I'm thinking about the situation. What should I do? It needs to be handled quickly. That's it, and then go. But the people that leaders hire need to, the hiring process needs to be done properly. And unfortunately, sometimes when you talk to somebody and you hire somebody, it's not always the proper fit. But the faster the both of you determine that and then get back on the right track, the faster success will occur. So back to you, Brett.
Yeah, and you listening to you there, you could end up hiring somebody who is brilliant at what to do and highly recommended, but they may not fit into the culture of the team. And unfortunately, your best bet may be to let them go.
Yeah.
because they don't fit. And I came across an interesting one where a guy employed a guy. There was a team working anyway on tech or whatever, but something didn't work out for this new fella, and he let a string of expletives. He roared and shouted and lost his head because this thing didn't work out. He was roaring at the laptop, I suppose. But the guy that owned the business knew that this wasn't working out. So he brought him aside, brought him outside, and said, "If that happens again, you're gone." Because he knew that this guy was going to disrupt the culture that he had so carefully built up. It didn't happen again. He learned his lesson. But that, if it was allowed to continue, not alone would people be alarmed when it happens again, they'd all be waiting for it to happen again. So it's every team has its own culture, and it's very necessary for every member to fit into that culture.
Yeah, I think one thing that I see too, Gerald, is I see some leaders cursing. And listen, if you want to curse, do your own thing. But in a business environment, I think it's 100% unacceptable. I don't know how either of you feel, but in a business environment, I think that is an absolute no, no matter what. If you're saying it in a demeaning way, or oh man, whatever it is, like for me, that is an immediate like non-negotiable. Like especially with a customer, or if a customer is hooting a holler, like listen, this relationship isn't going to work right here if we're going to continue to speak like that. And I just put a non-negotiable. There has to be non-negotiables within business. If someone comes in, with they have a drinking problem, they have a drug problem, whatever, they come into work influence. I'm not saying like we can't have that here. We're going to provide help for you, and we're going to provide you with assistance that you need, but we cannot let this happen again. Like we're gonna provide you with all the support. And again, these are non-negotiables that need to happen. Like with employees, it needs to be. And I know it's, there's just certain things that really hit home with me in terms of in terms of providing a solution for them, in terms of providing help for them. But there's certain things that we cannot have go on in the office in any way, shape, or form, and that's being an actual bully. Whether it be cutting somebody's tie when they get their first deal. I know that's hazing, that's bullying. And there's certain things, and I know, but it's a slippery slope. So I just try to run a clean shop, and I always say to small business owners, entrepreneurs, to other founders, like just run a clean shop like you're running, to the best of your ability. Don't let stuff go, because one apple, one negative person can influence multiple other people. So just run a tight ship, going back to the same sub story there.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned bullying, because the obvious bullying you can relate to, or we'll say sexual harassment or actual physical, but there's a lot more to bullying than that. That's hard to spot in places, and in some cases the bully and the person who's been bullied wouldn't realize it's bullying, but it is. And I think of the phrase all the time: lack of information, ostracization, and humiliation. And that can go on in organizations, both at CEO level and below. And I think everyone should be aware of it to start with, of the danger of it, and try and provide conditions where the exact opposite happens. But you can bully people by denying them information. You can bully people by not acknowledging their successes. And of course, the great thing is some people acknowledge it for themselves. They take other successes. But even without that, if somebody comes up with a brilliant idea and really that is very helpful, and they don't even get a cursory nod of the head that you've done well there. In Ireland, of course, you have your sports in the States. In Ireland, Gaelic games are all pervasive. We have soccer, rugby, and cricket, and all the other sports, but Gaelic games are almost in every community. And the big The World Series, if you like, is the All-Ireland final of hurling and football. Football is played with the hands and the feet, and hurling is fastest field sport in the world. But the managers, the most successful managers, are those who will stay silently on the sideline. And there could be two fellas literally beating the head off each other in front of them, and they won't, you won't show any emotion or won't show any, and they have it together, like they know. And a great saying is that, when a referee awards a penalty, which is usually a certain goal, usually, not always, everyone comes around the referee and complains about it. Whereas they should be concentrating on, well, if it hits the post and rebounds, we better get it before they should be giving their mate, their goalkeeper, a bit of confidence boosting or whatever. But a great saying is that demonstrating with the referee isn't much good to you, because seldom have I ever seen any of them change their mind. Once they award a penalty, with 83,000 people looking at them, they're not going to change their mind and not award it, whether it was right or wrong in the first place. So you better live with it and just get on with it and do the intelligent thing. Just prepare for, if the goalkeeper saves it, it can be put in again by another player. So you better be on the ball and look for that. But sport and business, there's a lot of overlapping there.
Definitely. No, I couldn't agree more. And I think we really lined up, the leadership side, Gerald, and, obviously meetings are being a concrete piece of that. And of course, empowering your leaders, whether it's the traditional sense of, a hierarchical leader and, how they need to properly understand the people beneath them, or, decentralizing what traditional leadership means to empower each and every individual across your company to make decisions, right? Which is what I think it really comes down to. So I'm curious, segueing a little bit from the leadership, but keeping that foundation of conversation, Gerald, when it comes to technology, right? And we don't have to go into the deep systems or different options or things that are out there, just the 30,000 foot view, right? Of, how do you view technology, and, where do you see it in your everyday life or in these businesses, having a meaningful impact, in the next 3 to 5 years, compared to, maybe how it's changed our lives in the previous 3 to 5?
Well, I believe it's going to be an enormous change in the next. It's being called the fourth industrial revolution, but the simple fact is that artificial intelligence has allowed computers to make calculations that it would take today's computer 10,000 years to do. So that, even to anyone, that's something that's pretty awesome now. That's pretty. So that is going to bring changes, and it's going to bring changes to the way we work, the type of jobs we do, and it's going to, I suppose, cut out a lot of jobs, a lot of labor-intensive jobs, and white-collar jobs in accountancy and the legal profession, and that's to be welcomed, as long as we have to embrace change. And I think the biggest change might happen in education, because the system of education we have, for years it was a matter of getting in the 1960s, if you were lucky to get to university, and if you got a BA, a bachelor's degree, you were set up for life, and if you taught maybe, or you got a job with the government or whatever, and you didn't have to open a book again. But that day is gone, because of this rapid change. So it's lifelong learning is with us now, and we all have to keep up. And technology, that's where I see technology really changing things. And I just the Ever Given is the big cargo ship that blocked the Suez Canal and caused mayhem around the world, cost billions of dollars. That was all due to human error.
Yes.
It can be afterwards. It was all explained by physics. The containers were piled so high that they acted as a sail, and the ship was going too fast. And the bow, with the wind and the shape of the ship, the bow was inclined to go to one bank, and the stern was inclined to go to the other bank, and that's eventually what happened. And they were stuck in a bank that's right across the Suez Canal. And just luckily enough, a high tide lifted. High tide lifts all boats, but it lifted this one anyway, because it would have been some mess. They could have tried to unload it. It could have broken in two. This could have been a lot worse than it was. But there was where tech wasn't used. That was human error.
Definitely.
And all problems, actually, what tech does is it brings all problems down to a mathematical equation, and it eliminates human error. And that's where tech goes. One amazing thing is that we're talking online here now, but this technology has been available for the last 10 years, but nobody bothered to use it until COVID came along. And the other thing is that I think medical telemedicine is the phrase. They had about 2,000 instances of telemedicine in the US, where they would direct people over the internet. And when COVID came along, it was 5,000 a week. So the technology was there, it just wasn't being used. And then the whole motor industry, the technology, the whole. I have great faith, that there are a lot of people are worried about not reaching our emission targets, but I have great faith that we will. I think the technology is improving all the time. Especially in the area of storing electricity, that was the big problem that couldn't be solved. But there's individual states in the United States are pumping a lot of money into this. And last week in Ireland, 75% of our power was created by renewables. Now, for the few months before, for believe it or not, we didn't have a lot of wind, and but it will affect a lot of things if we get away from fossil fuels. Most of the wars that occurred in the past were over fossil fuels, or the ownership of the fields. So maybe that'd be one less reason to go to war. But yes, technology and leadership. Obviously, the human element is there all the time and will be there. It's this species that's creating the technology. So it will be an assist to leadership, but it will have to be used. Data is king, and to be able to, I suppose in preparation for this, I was looking at a blog there from the Association of Certified E-Discovery Specialists, and I just look in. A friend of mine got me involved in it, and I've gone to looked at one or two webinars and that. But in legal terms, 80% of our documentation, although it was cumbersome in the old days, it was all box files and ring binders and going back further to ancient manuscripts. But it's 80% of it is not documented. It's all out there in the world, and it will take artificial intelligence when major court cases involve what has been said out in the ether on social media. It will take AI and keywords to discover all of that and discover these new types of documents. So in a way, we've gone backwards. We have no track of these documents. They're out there, but we don't have a track of them or trace of them. They're not neatly stored and filed away in a dusty box somewhere. We have to go looking for them, and AI and data sourcing is going to help us there. So I would education and education in tech is going to be very, very important.
Definitely.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree. And, the lifelong learning is where I think some of the biggest opportunities lie. A lot of people are concerned with the shift. Obviously, jobs will change, the type of skills in which we need for jobs to acquire, right? Those will change a little bit as well. But, a major argument is that, most humans are not meant to be doing these redundant tasks, right? That's why the one thing that separates us from any other animal or creature out there, if you will, right, is our ability to have creativity, right, and think in an abstract way and not just be pure logical driven where a lot of these tasks are, right? If you're an accountant, it's logically reading the numbers, right, setting up the structure. Your creativity is coming into, how you're managing those, right? But within a framework of a law, there's so many things that are standardized, right?
Yeah.
So as more and more of these things, like you said, Gerald, right, essentially what we're doing is technology standardizing all these experiences because it's breaking them out so cleanly mathematically that it's very black and white for every single scenario that could happen, right? Like how AI can beat the best chess player in the world. It's because, yes, in some level of a degree in the human brain, every move on that chessboard is infinite, right? But to technology, there is a finite amount of moves that can be made on that board at any given time. A human brain just couldn't compile what are all those potential moves, right, or recall them all in one moment based on a specific scenario. So I think it is, really interesting as we get, we like to say if you're hired as a sales guy, you're hired to sell, right? You're not hired to update CRMs or, call
Absolutely,
people
yeah.
20 times a day. So the more that we can get those skill sets and responsibilities, supplemented by technology, then the real reason of, humanity, if you will, and creativity can be fully empowered. And that should be what allows us to progress further and further as a civilization, because we're not wasting time, in these redundant layers of tasks, if you will.
It should be seen as a positive. Too many people, look at the negatives. And the other area where it will definitely be a help is contracts, to be able to produce contracts quickly and efficiently, because they hold up a lot of deals, and the legal profession will have to take cognizance of that, but people will have to adopt. There's a very good book, The Silk Road, about the birth of civilization in Asia, and at that time the big wonder was the roads that were built and the communication that could be, the letters that could be sent vast distances within a week. And we're only multiplying that. It's technology has affected every generation, and we have to accept it and embrace it. It just, nothing stands still.
It's very
But
true.
the quality of leadership, those parameters will still be there.
Correct. And like you said, Gerald, I think, right, no matter what the shift is, no matter what you're adapting to, it's going to be, your strong communication structure and the empowerment of those leaders that will allow you, to combat and engage in any type of scenario while still having a successful outcome, right? At the end of the day, no matter how many tools we get, no matter how many different approaches we get or processes we get, it's still going to always fall into the hands of the people, to execute, what will present a successful outcome and make that decision.
And I guess one of the big literal bottlenecks at the moment is transport with cargo ships now waiting to be unloaded, and technology should be enable that to be done a lot more smoothly. But from what I read is that some of these companies are very slow to embrace new technology, and they unless they do, they will be left behind too. So
Certainly. Couldn't have said that better myself. And I think it's true, much like adopting, just new ways of business, new ways of leading, right? It just always comes down to being agile and never being too hard and fast, right? Or thinking what there is, because your environment's always changing around you, whether you see the change or not.
Yeah, there are plenty of examples where companies got into a rut. They kept producing the same thing, and they got used to it, making adequate profits, but they didn't look ahead. I visited a man he had a small wholesale business many years ago, but he was there in a little cubicle office, and I'm sure he was doing the same thing his grandfather did, and a big ledger in front of him, and he totting it up. And I just says, well, he was near retiring age himself, so I guess, but I said, this won't last much longer, this is archaic. And the other one was the mills. There were beside me in Ballina on the Moy River, a lovely fishing river. There was Murphy's Mills, and at the time in 1934, when it was built, it was the most the less people needed to create the product. There was only 34 people needed. It was very efficient at the time. But then, of course, that was superseded decades later by more efficient mills. So nothing stands still. And that's why that's rudimentary technology. But, the industrialized age created the 40-hour week. It was a lot more than 40 when it started. But, there's no reason to believe that will continue either.
It's very true. No, I completely agree, Gerald. And I think, that might be a perfect spot for us to kind of tie things in, both with the mixture of the leadership, right? What stands in the future for, really driving decentralized leadership and communication across your organization, and the role that technology may play. We know it will be a progressive one, but we'll see how much it continues to drive a shift, in the industry. So I just wanted to take the time to thank you so much for joining us today, Gerald. It's a great episode. We're really excited to bring all of this to our viewers. And I think everybody's going to leave with some completely new takeaways that they can, provide and start executing straight into their business right away. So just want to thank you again for coming on. Give you a chance to let everybody know where they can find you, on LinkedIn, what your website is, wherever you'd like them to reach out to you. And we'll be sure to include that in all of our show notes as well. So if you'd like to take a moment, please let everybody know where to find you.
Yeah, well, LinkedIn on O'Connor Leadership, and then my website also is O'Connor Leadership. So Gerald@O'ConnorLeadership.com is my email if you want to get into personal contact. So it's as simple as that. My phone and all details are on the LinkedIn site. So by the way, I just an interesting post on LinkedIn today. Liverpool, of course, in England are a very major soccer club, very successful. And there was a 19-year-old making his debut. And of course, that was a nervous time for him. He was in front of 50,000 Liverpool fans. But the manager said to him, he says, the only reason you're playing is because I decided, so whatever happens is down to me. You just go out and enjoy yourself. So I think he showed leadership there and took the weight off the young fella's shoulders and let him at it, So I just thought it was a nice post that I noticed today on LinkedIn.
Definitely. No, and I think it ties everything, completely in from what we were discussing today. So, Gerald, we really appreciate you coming on. We'll be sure to make sure anybody from our audience can find all your information in the show notes below. If you guys enjoyed the episode, please just click the like and subscribe button. And we look forward to having you on again in the future, Gerald. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Cheers.